Over the past few years, stories and campfire tales have come and gone about cursed copies of beloved video games, either killing players or cursing them to a life of doom. Games have been this weird breeding ground for the creation of horrific ideas since their popularization. In the 1980s, an arcade game named Berzerk had come into Friar Tuck's game room in Calumet City, Illinois, and with it came the game's primary antagonist, a yellow smiley face named Evil Otto, where over the course of the next decade, Otto would allegedly take the lives of 3 young men. The tales would tell that the 3 young men played a round of Berzerk, got high scores, and then Otto had killed them on the spot. So, did Evil Otto kill these men? Or is there a much more reasonable and logical explanation for these men passing? Let's get into it. The first case we'll be looking at today is the case of a young Peter Bukowski. It was a cold morning on April 2nd, 1982, and Calumet City had just gotten a thick layer of fresh snow. Being the start of the weekend, Peter Bukowski didn't want to stay inside all day, and so he went to his girlfriend's place. After a while, he had gone back home, then trudged through the snow to the home of his friend, Ben Everett. The two had then began their trek to Friar Tuck's game room. The entire adventure was an estimated 4 miles total. Roughly halfway to the game room, Bukowski had complained about feeling out of breath and rather thirsty, so the two had stopped by the nearest convenience store. Bukowski purchased a soda and slammed it back as soon as possible. Then the two had continued on their way to the game room. When Bukowski had gotten there, he took his jacket off due to feeling rather hot and went directly to the Berzerk machine. He, in a span of roughly 20 minutes, had played 2 games, entering his high score into the machine. After the second game, he had stepped away from the machine for a break. Unfortunate for him, not too long after doing this, Bukowski would fall to the floor. When paramedics arrived, he would be pronounced dead. So why did this seemingly healthy young man pass so suddenly? Well, not too long after his death, his family had ordered an autopsy, which had revealed that Bukowski's heart was covered in fat and scar tissue from an undiagnosed congenital condition, specifically arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy. So this seems pretty clean cut. Peter's death was due to severe strain on his heart after a long day of trudging through heavy snow, as well as the added effects of the soda proving to be too hard on his heart, causing him to drop dead. Overall, he died of a heart attack instead of being killed directly by Otto. So if Peter Bukowski's death was not caused by Otto, surely the other two had something to do with Otto, right? Well, the story of Jeff Dailey and Peter Bukowski are awfully similar to the point that his death was in 1981, an entire year beforehand, in the exact same city, in the exact same Friar Tuck's game room, for what's said to be the exact same reason. According to All in Color for a Quarter, in January 1981, 19-year-old Jeff Dailey is said to have dropped dead after racking up a high score of 16,660 points on Berzerk, but details are sketchy and it may be nothing more than urban legend. I am unsure of the original source of this story. Wikipedia attributes it to the game's entry at arcadehistory.com, which also doesn't list a source. A post on Snopes.com claims the story, or maybe it was just the Bukowski one, appeared in Russell DeMaria's high score, but the excerpt on Amazon, which includes the Berzerk section, doesn't mention it. I have found no contemporary evidence of this alleged incident. A search of the Social Security Death Index shows that a Jeffrey Allen Dailey, aged 19, died in late May of 1981. This Dailey, however, died in Virginia from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. Personally, I find this whole story rather doubtful. Furthermore, Berzerk champion Grant Thienman stated that there is no way possible to play hours on a game of Berzerk and only get 16k, cementing the idea that this tale was likely fabricated to play off the Bukowski case. In my own research, I couldn't find any solid evidence of this either, as everything leads right back to a site named Arcade History, and they provide so kindly a few sources. Unfortunately, there's nothing to these sources that provide any further evidence of Jeff Dailey being a real person. According to GotGame.com, 3 Jeff Daileys had died around the time this story took place. Two elderly men named Jeff Dailey in Illinois, although the Jeff in our story is a younger lad, being 19. And then the other Jeff Dailey that I had mentioned earlier, who died in Virginia due to a car accident. Fellow creator Nexpo had also made a video about this topic, and he cites Video Ace, a defunct video game magazine, as the origin of this story. Alas, I won't be able to know, as I couldn't find anything about Video Ace myself, nor does Nexpo put any source links in his description. As far as I know, the Video Ace source is also just hearsay. Truth be told, I highly doubt that Jeff Dailey in this story has ever existed in 1981. I'm certain it was just a farce for publicity. Edward Clark Jr. was the third and final death in the 80s due to Otto. March 20th, 1988, 17-year-old Edward Clark Jr. in the warm Monday evening went to Friar Tuck's game room to have a bit of fun before he would have to go back to school the next day. When Clark had gotten to the game room, he went to Battlezone and played a few rounds first, then proceeded to the Berzerk machine that had been played by Bukowski just a few years earlier. He had noticed a few unclaimed quarters atop the Berzerk machine, took one, and played a round of Berzerk with it. But that fun wouldn't have been had for too long before the local hooligan, Pedro Roberts, would come up and claim the quarters were his, and that Clark was stealing from him. Roberts had demanded that Clark get off the game, or else. Now, Pedro Roberts is an aggressive kid. He was street smart, tough, and said to be emotionally void of empathy when angered or engaged in conflict. Clark, being a troublemaker himself, refused to get off, which led to Clark and Robert getting into a fight, but not for too long before an attendant had separated the two and kicked Roberts out of the game room. The same attendant had kept Clark in the arcade for about 10 minutes to reduce the chance of something worse happening. When Clark did leave, the attendant specifically told him to go the opposite way to further avoid conflict. Clark didn't listen to the attendant, and on his way home, Roberts had run from across the parking lot to stab Clark in the chest. Clark, thinking he wasn't too harmed, refused a hospital visit, until he was on the verge of collapsing. Then his friends had gotten him to the nearest hospital, where he would unfortunately pass away. Roberts would be arrested the following day and put into jail until his court appearance 2 years later, where he would be sentenced to 11 years of jail due to second-degree murder. But since his killing of Clark was a self-defense ruling, Robert would be eligible for parole after serving 3 years. Interestingly enough, Roberts would serve his sentence at the Marion prison, the same prison where the infamous control and rehabilitation effort would begin. The prison specifically pioneering the lockdown techniques and sensory deprivation for the proliferation of mind control experiments on young inmates. The same stuff as seen in the infamous Polybius urban legend. Edward Clark Jr. wasn't killed by evil Otto. A case can be made that he was killed inadvertently because of Berzerk, but not directly by it. All in all, looking at the cases, they had almost nothing to do with evil Otto. Bukowski died due to an undiagnosed heart condition. The Jeff Dailey case is questionable entirely, but if true, it most likely would have been the same case as Bukowski. And Edward Clark Jr. was murdered by Pedro Roberts, not Otto, much less anything related to Berzerk. Overall, it's a far stretch of the imagination to say that evil Otto had or will ever kill anyone.